Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Data Unchained. I'm your host, Molly Presley. Let me tell you a little bit about this podcast if you're not real familiar with it. The Data Unchained podcast covers all things about data becoming a very decentralized resource. As we're all very familiar with, we're creating data in mobile devices, at the edge in autonomous vehicles, in space and satellites, and all other places across data centers and cloud environments. And as we think about the future of making data a real asset that we can use globally, there's a lot of challenges with the technology as well as some of the security and governance policies, but a lot of opportunities as well of getting information that's hidden within that data. So today, without further ado, we'll be talking with Jonathan Bloch. He is the CEO of Exchange Data. But before we go into more about Exchange Data International, Jonathan, first, just welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And where are you joining us from?
I'm basically based in London, although I travel very extensively to the US, Europe, Africa, and around the world.
Sounds like a lovely gig that you have going. All great places to be. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background that led you to the position you're in Exchange Data International today?
So I'm from South Africa, where I studied law. I then came over to England to do a master's in law at the London School of Economics. Having achieved that, I then went into publishing, and I worked for a Latin American company for 7 years, and then joined a company which ultimately became a public company, and I was a main board director there, and left roughly 31 years ago, and subsequently set up Exchange Data International. This month, about to come in July, 30 years ago.
Wow. So you've been at Exchange Data International for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about that company and really what are you tackling with the technology and the offerings you have available there?
So Exchange Data International covers all stock markets and securities markets around the world. So we cover equities, fixed income, derivatives, and funds. And we originally started with bulletin boards. Probably most of your audience has never experienced the slow motion of dialing up to get data coming through a modem. But that's how we started. And then as the internet came on, we moved over to SFTP. And so we've gone on this journey where it's a journey which is never completed because technology changes all the time.
And so you're based in London, which certainly makes sense, and your different locations where you travel to certainly makes sense as well as where some of the big markets run out of. Tell us a little bit about who are the types of customers when you say you cover these markets. Who are your customers? Where are you gathering data from? Maybe tell us just a little bit more about kind of what are you buying when you buy your technology?
We gather what they call reference data and corporate actions, as well as closing prices from all markets. And we sell that to other service providers, that is, people who provide data to end users. And those end users can be banks, brokerage houses, fund managers, hedge funds, etc.
We talk about decentralized data and Data Unchained, and you're right in the thick of it because not only do you have data being used around the world, you have certainly security, compliance, multi-countries to deal with. What's your feeling about data today? Where are you gathering data sources? How constrained are you by regulation, security? Maybe just kind of set the framework for the concerns or that you might have around data today.
Well, there's tremendous opportunities and also tremendous concerns. The amount of data being produced is phenomenal. But with that come a lot of issues, both intellectual property issues as well as security issues. How do you know that the data you gather in doesn't have malware attached to it? How do you know whether you have the legal rights to the data? The law is very unclear at the moment. There's a lot of ambiguity.
Do you find that the laws are different country by country, more evolved or just conflicting even? Is that something you have to worry about?
Absolutely. Every jurisdiction has its own rules, and some jurisdictions are more strict than others in certain areas. So, for example, if you take privacy laws, just in the US itself, California is much stricter than a lot of other states. And these are considerations when you're a global data vendor, depending obviously on the type of data you sell in, that you have to take account of the laws across the world, because otherwise you might be breaching some law and it comes later to haunt you.
So when you sell data or make data, I don't know if selling data is quite the right word, but when you make data available to one of your customers, let's say it's a trading institute, a bank, have you cleaned up and taken care of those concerns for them?
Well, let's put it to you this way. A lot of time is spent on negotiating contracts where everybody's trying
That's
to
the legal background.
lay liability on you, and you're trying to get away from accepting legal liability.
Okay, got it. And this is complex, as everyone who listens to this show knows. Lots of data sources, lots of rules, lots of complexities that you have to worry about, and handling this manually is difficult. A human manually taking care of investigating every single data set, applying policies, validating is impossible, I would say. And so you and I talked a little bit when we were planning for this show about the rise of the API and the value that has brought. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you use APIs and how has that helped you to open up new opportunities?
As another form of technology has emerged, namely the cloud, and people put a lot of data into the cloud, they've also realized it becomes quite expensive to hold so much data. So instead, people want to only gather the data that they're going to use. So it's much easier to pull, using an API, particular data points. And that allows them to really manage their budgets much more effectively, because they don't have to take huge data feeds and then store them. Instead, they can just pick and choose exactly what they want.
So as you think about this, is that your company, Exchange Data International, who's picking and choosing and pulling data sets and kind of aggregating the data sources, or who is doing that work?
Well, it's the clients.
Okay.
So we are taking all our data, creating endpoints, and we can customize those. We can customize those endpoints to suit the client's requirements, and then they can just select the data they want for any particular security.
Okay, that makes sense. And so it's their data using your
APIs.
framework and APIs. Got it. Okay, that helps me understand a little bit better. And so you don't have to worry about using data that is not appropriate or not licensed or their own, because the client is managing that themselves. Is that the right way to think about it?
Not quite.
Okay.
I mean, we are gathering the data. We are then providing it in a form where they can select from that data using an API.
Gotcha.
So they
Okay.
can then pick and choose exactly what data they want. And they don't have to take a file of, say, 10,000 instruments, where they only need 500 particular instruments.
Okay. And what do they tend to do with this data? Are they making trading decisions, investment decisions? Is that primarily what they're doing?
A lot of the data we provide, I call infrastructural data. So they use that to set up the securities in what we call a security master file, which then allows them to trade that security, to value that security, to attach any corporate actions. And corporate actions are changes in the nature of the security. So a company might change its name, it might do a stock split, it might liquidate, and all this needs to be captured on the computer.
Okay.
So if you look as an analogy at a body has a spine, and attached to the spine are various ribs and other appendages. What we provide is the spine, and then people attach lots of different data sets to that spine.
And we talk, I can't help but think about all the genomics and biotech companies we talk about, different type of situation where they're trying to recreate spines and things like that. But a great analogy. I love that. Now, what about security? Are you concerned about ransomware getting hacked, about the wrong client having access to the wrong data? How big of a concern is that in your space?
Huge concerns about hacking. I mean, there was a statistic that something like 50% of British businesses have been hacked.
That's really high. Not surprising,
Right?
I suppose, but it's very high. Yeah.
And it's very easy for them to do that because unless you keep up with all the security updates and all the software you're using, unless you have multi-factor authentication in every application that you employ, etc., 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 they will find a way in. Plus, there's phishing or using email. And it only needs one employee to click on something which is malicious for them to get access.
Usually it's not appropriate to ask how you handle security concerns because that's not something you really want to talk publicly about. But what are kind of some of the overarching pieces you're touching on? There's certainly the limiting access to data sets. There's ensuring that you're meeting regulatory requirements, but maybe you can go a little bit more deeply into
Sure.
how you
I
handle
mean, one
that.
of the things that we do, and I would suggest this to anybody listening, is we hire a specialist firm who monitor the dark web for any mention of us. Because there are people, and it's become a business now, there are people who hack and they then sell your credentials on the dark web.
Absolutely.
And then the people who buy those credentials do ransomware. And so they're two different groups of people. And if you could catch the people who are trying to sell your credentials, you can then stop the ransomware. There are specialist firms who will monitor the dark web. And to be fair, and I'm quite transparent, we employ such a firm.
And that makes sense. Then you know where to look, what do you need to tighten up and where maybe are they getting in, which
Exactly.
makes perfect sense.
And not many people know about that facility.
That's a great tip. Yeah, absolutely. Is it expensive? Are these firms
No.
something that most companies should be able to afford?
I mean, I think we pay roughly $1,300 a month.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so
it's not expensive
well
and
worth
saves
the protection.
you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you should experience ransomware.
Okay, perfect.
And the second tip I can give is never pay any ransomware, because then you lay yourself open to them repeatedly coming back, as well as potential legal consequences.
What are the legal consequences related to paying for ransomware? This may be a naive question, but...
Well, you could be financing a terrorist organization.
I see. Where the money is going
to
ultimately.
Or sanctioned organization and get yourself ensnared in legal traps.
Makes sense. Okay. So let's talk about AI. Everybody in the world loves to talk about AI right now and machine learning. Is this a technology that you're using within your product? Is it something your customers are using? Is it not really interesting in your space right now?
So we are using a lot of machine learning, but in a very limited way.
Okay. What type of use case?
One of the use cases is bots. To go out and check if websites have changed or data on websites has changed.
Okay.
That can save a huge amount of manual work. So you've got a bot, it scours the web or a certain, say, 1,000 websites and sees has anything changed overnight. That is a fantastic use.
Love that. And something, again, that humans couldn't do easly on their own.
Yeah. Where it fails, however, and why you still need humans involved, there's no law which says that people have to retain the same format of the data on a website.
Certainly.
So you can find a change And you might have the technology to download that change and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, etc., provided the format remains the same.
Right, right.
So you have to check that manually to see, otherwise garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely. Yep. Change a
So
file name, change a format, and you may not recognize
exactly,
the same data set for sure.
right? So it works best, machine learning works best where there is an exact format which never changes. Usually because a regulator says this form has got to be completed in a certain way.
That would lead one to the question around, is that practical? Is a designated format or a designated standard something that is in the foreseeable future?
Well, it depends on the industry putting pressure on the relevant regulators. So for example, in the financial community, you have every country will have somebody managing, or several organizations managing reporting facilities, reporting obligations rather, such as FINRA or SEC in the US or FCA in the UK. And they can mandate standardized procedures and forms.
Do they?
No.
It's funny. It's like no matter which industry it is, the utopia of data standards and standards around formats and what's included and all that. Everyone wants it, but it's very difficult to actually get somebody motivated enough to do it. There's
So
a
I'll
lot
tell you
to
a
it.
funny story about that. So corporate actions can be very hard to program because they can be very complicated. Mergers and takeovers can be very complicated. So the industry got together and they set up a standard.
Okay.
It's called ISO 15022. We provide a lot of ISO 15022 feeds to our clients, but most of them are customized. So yeah, you've got an attempt by the industry to standardize certain data points, data feeds, but the industry won't accept it. So they want it customized, defeating the object of standardization.
That seems a bit of a dichotomy, the customized standard.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, that is so the technology is way ahead of the human behavior.
So, how does a company like yours help a customer in this area? You have the backbone, as you mentioned, you have the ribs and the connection points, the nerves coming in. Are you helping them with both the data quality as well as the results of they're getting in? Who should they be looking to help them in these areas?
So we can assist them in helping to define their data needs
Okay.
with good quality data. I mean, how they process that data, how they get that data in and the outputs, that's really up to the IT people.
Absolutely. And the idea of IT being able to work with the business and understand the business needs and how the data is going to be used, and then complement that, threading in the technology that will give consistent data sets that aren't redundant, that haven't been forked, and all that is super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a tripartite alliance. You've got the business who have got needs, you've got the data vendor like ourselves who can provide the data, and you've got the IT people, both or potentially both internally and externally, who can provide the solution to satisfy the business requirements.
When you think about how organizations are putting these strategies together, who's driving it? Is it a C-suite CIO type person, or who is it that is pulling this kind of the triangle team together of the different roles that make these projects work?
Well, it depends on the organization. So, for example, if it's a hedge fund or a fund management company, the strategy will often come from trading. And they will say, there's a big opportunity in, say, Chinese securities. What data do we need to gather? What are the peculiarities of that data? so that our database has got to be adapted. How are we going to receive it? How are we going to analyze it? How are we going to put it out to the traders? And so the person who's coming up with the strategy will often rely on the market data people to suggest data vendors.
Okay.
They will then consult with the CTO, and a team will be established to try and explore this particular trading strategy.
Okay, perfect. So what do you see coming next? I mean, I come from more of the IT tech side and, focus a lot on data sources, the technology that is helping to make insights from data possible. What's next in your world? Is it around evolving tech? Is it something after AI and the cloud? Or is there something else on the horizon that's going to really affect these industries?
Well, I think there's several things, in the offing. For example, AI has not really been used very extensively in the financial service sector at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that will definitely start playing a role. And it will start playing a role because the big IT companies are involved. I'm fairly pessimistic about a lot of the startups because I think that this will be in the same way that Google has dominated search. A couple of players will dominate AI.
And generally, financial services, while very technology savvy, maybe are a little bit slower in adopting because there's so much risk involved
Exactly.
in any misstep. So you think financial services will wait a bit longer to see who the big vendors are and adopt, as they are confident in the risks as well as the capabilities of those models. Is that how you would kind of think about it?
Yes, also, you could have a big blow up and then the regulators will step in.
Which I think all of
You
us
could
are watching and thinking that could, right? I mean, it seems
yeah.
possible.
The whole fat finger syndrome at the moment involves an individual pressing the wrong key.
Mm.
What happens if you've got an AI generated trading strategy and it goes haywire or gets hacked?
Yeah, the ramifications are a bit mind-boggling, aren't they?
Yes. And then you'll see the regulators wade in, very heavily.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think it's a bit of the Wild West at the moment because the full parameters have not been sketched out. So we, are sort of wandering into the desert, but it's in the dark.
So, Jonathan, when you think about the size of data sets that you're working with, maybe that you're collecting and then distributing out to a trading firm, where do you come into the challenge associated with larger data sets?
So most of the data sets we handle are pretty manageable. You could put them up on an SFTP website and they can download. But there are certain data sets, particularly in the derivative space, and also what they call tick data, which basically covers all the activity on a stock exchange or derivative exchange, which are huge. And you could be talking billions of data items. That's a major challenge. And people often use the cloud to both store that data and then for the client to download, because it could take ages to upload and also then download. And then there are new ways of managing that data. There are certain companies which have emerged where people are storing that type of big data.
Mm-hmm.
I can mention just a couple: Databricks, Snowflake, etc. There could be others where they are used for managing that type of data set.
You have to worry not just about the data set quality, consistency, but also the distribution of this data set and fast enough. And it's interesting. My company partners with companies like Snowflake and Databricks to help unify the data sources and get access to their transactions and models. And like you say, that's changing quickly. But with tick data, isn't the competitive advantage often getting insights in that data quicker than your competitor? Am I thinking about that properly?
Well, I mean, there are not that many providers of tick data because of the sheer volume involved. We ourselves partner with other companies to provide that. We do not provide that ourselves because
Okay,
it's a
got it.
very specialist area. You've got to have tremendous storage capability, even if you use third parties. And you also got to have very specialist knowledge because the different types of tick data, different time periods, different sorts of data. And so, we tend to leave that to specialist firms, but it's a challenge because it's such a great volume. And if you want to search
absolutely.
through it and get insights and use AI on it, you've got to have tremendous computing power.
Absolutely. Lots of GPUs.
Yes.
As we wrap things up, what would you like to leave people with? One of the things we talked about was you really have to understand your domain, no matter which domain you're in. The importance of understanding all these components, the risks, the data quality, the potential outcomes, and what they might mean to the decisions. How are people navigating this since it is the Wild West? Are they do you see them just holding back and doing things the way that are proven and they have for a while, or are they incrementally taking steps in some kind of methodical way? How do you see the companies progressing?
Well, I think it depends on the particular kind of company. There are some companies who have innovation labs and try and see whether there's any new technology coming out which could benefit them. There are some banks who invest strategically in new startups, which might have technology that they could use. I think you've seen that particularly in the payment space. And then you've got other companies who wait till everybody else has introduced it and tried and failed or tried and succeeded, and then they might move over to some new technology. And I mean, I could just tell you a story. It took us probably 8 years to retire the last company on bulletin boards because they weren't sure that the internet would last.
And how do you really confirm, right? It's difficult to do.
And I think there are a lot of challenges, but there's also lots of opportunities which are going to emerge with the technology because the journey started, but it hasn't ended.
And where are these organizations, let's just say it's a bank, where are they sharing information? Where are they learning from each other? Are there user groups? Is it conferences? Is there some kind of, like regulatory group meetings that are occurring where they can learn from each other and what's going well and what is, potentially needing a lot of focus?
Well, often the banks, particularly the big investment banks, form consortia to invest in new technology. So you saw several consortia who invested in blockchain, for example.
Right.
So the banks tend to hunt in a pack rather than take the risk themselves, solely by themselves.
I'm having a hard time not. I was in South Africa not too long ago at a game reserve, and I was thinking about a pack of hyenas that was hunting. That was the imagery going through my head, going from where you said you were originally from. I'm not sure they want to be compared to hyenas. There's probably something higher up the food chain they'd prefer.
No, but I mean, the banks often are adverse to doing things by themselves. They rather partner with effectively with their competitors.
Right. Okay.
To explore the technology. So instead of investing $100 million into a venture, they'd rather get 10 banks putting in 10 million each.
Yes, absolutely.
And some of those consortium have been extremely successful, and some have failed.
But something everyone sees the need to invest in and benefit from each other and then compete where you can have better differentiation. That makes sense.
Yes, exactly.
So, Jonathan, where do you come into these conversations? Are you helping advise companies on the steps to take? Do you wait until they call you? I'm thinking of the listeners to our show, and we have a lot of folks from the financial services industry in our space. Like, who do you tend to talk to first? And if they're interested in pulling in exchange data as part of their strategy, how do they get started?
So often we deal with people who are on the front line of making data decisions. So it could be an analyst. It could be somebody working on a particular strategy for a company. It could be somebody in procurement who's been approached to find a data source. It could be somebody trying some new technology and needs data for that. It varies tremendously.
Okay.
As do the job functions of the people who approach us.
And so how do they learn where you can help and where you cannot? Like you say, it's different functions, different types of organizations. Is it best to have a conversation with someone in your team live, or is there good information on websites where they can peruse what's available?
So we have a website, which is exchange-data.com, which shows and presents all our products. But we also do a lot of bespoke work for people. So it's best to get in contact with the team, info@exchange-data.com. And we have teams in Europe and teams in North America. And they would love to talk to people about how we could help solve their problems.
Okay, perfect. And we'll definitely include those links into the show notes for any of you who are watching online and have access to the show notes. One other question I have, just that I probably should have asked earlier, but it's interesting to me. You work with a lot of different countries, and local language data, I would think, is an interesting complexity. Are you managing data sets in many different languages? Is that something that you help organizations to sort through?
So we translate 39 languages a day.
Oh, wow.
And there we've started to use some of the software available to speed up the process, but it's still got to be curated by a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we find that local language sources are much richer than the English translations provided by the same organization, because they tend to summarize for the translation, while the local language will have much more granular information.
That's fascinating. The idea that the language itself natively, there's subtleties that you would lose by just a brute force translation. That makes sense, though. So you translate it, and then if it's a British bank who is using that data set, they don't have to worry about any of that. That's already a part of the data set which they acquire.
Yes.
Got it.
Whether it be Japanese, Korean, Estonian, Chinese, Arabic, French, German, Spanish. I could rattle off 39 languages.
I'm not sure I could. All right, great. Hey, Jonathan, this was a really interesting conversation. We'll definitely include some information about the company and how to reach you all in the show notes. Thank you for joining the show.
Thanks very much for having me. Very illuminating, your questions as you focused on what's really going to happen in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace.